Hello, Stephen. Good morning to you. How are you doing?
I'm fine. Very well. Bright and early?
Yes, this is quite early because when you listen to us, maybe you listen to us a little bit later. But today with Stephen, we're in pre-recording. And this is a Sunday, 9 a.m. in the morning. Thank you, Stephen, to be with us on the summit, Healing the Family Tree, how to activate the positive heritage of the family. Stephen, would you like to give us a little bit words about you before I can give to the people some elements of your bio? And I'd like to know what made you becoming a Tibetan and Chinese medicine healer. Do you want to tell us a little bit more how you came on this mission?
So, from an academic point of view, it started when I was about 20 years old. In fact, I was struck by lightning. Totally struck by lightning. It wasn't struck by lightning and falling in love, but struck by real lightning. The lightning went through my body, and I suddenly realized there were things I needed to understand. And all of this led me down a path towards dreams, to a very special person who taught me so much how to interpret life and also honorism and dreams. And it's through that I understood many metaphysical questions. Perhaps I grew up in a rather special family and I had to put things into the right order. So this path led me gradually towards Chinese medicine, which I studied with a man who unfortunately is no longer with us, Mr. Zander, a great man in Chinese medicine. And it started in the Himalayas through a man I met there who was working for Nicolas Hulot at that time for Ushuaia. And so while I was out in the Himalayas, I was part of this team. And then he realized after 2 or 3 days that I wasn't quite such an important person for France. So we got on really well together right from the start. And he introduced me to a school friend of his, Machabi, who is Can you tell us?
Qu'est-ce que vous pouvez nous dire? Qu'est-ce que c'est un Machensi là-bas?
It's a Tibetan doctor. So it's like in China, you have to study for 8 years, and then they have their diploma in medicine. And during this journey, I discovered a type of learning or a way of teaching in a little pebble. It's the Tibetan Buddha, and in this little pebble there was this type of updating your health. And it's a type of, it was work that we did through another Lama, the Karmapa. And we worked together for years. I obviously went back and forwards to Himalaya. So I'd like to explain this passage before sidetracking to my approach with regards to what I've understood in what our family goals are. So in this honoric system, especially within the Tibetan system, there isn't really emotion. In Tibetan medicine, our emotions are poisons. There aren't really positive and negative emotions in this world of dreams or shamanism, honoric world. Mm-hmm. there's this notion of acceptance. The work isn't there, it's elsewhere. It's all of this system. It's a type of, we work on our spirit within our emotions. So it's true that people from Asia aren't very emotional.
Did.
They are capable for years to sleep with 15 in the same bed. They don't really have, the parents are sharing. They don't really show their emotions so much. They don't cuddle each other as much as we do. So it's true. It's more the work on our spirit itself. So in an honoric point of view, it's a special, strange. It's total acceptance of who we are. We manage, we reach a possibility to express ourselves through a generic, through the family tree, the mother and the father. And in our choice, there is a lot that comes from our spirit. So I think we can say that 98% is the spirit, and only 2% comes from your parents, your mother and father. So it's, if we can accept this character, it's like this, it's the fact. Sometimes there's our intellect, there's also this negative baggage perhaps that we carry within our character. So this character, in being dissociated, can lead us to what we work on at night. And there we have the link, the direct link with this 98%, working on your spirit.
And when you speak about training to become someone, how many times does it take? Is there a specific age where it stops, or does it continue?
So I think it's very curious. It's something we're all interested in. Working in the honoric world of dreams. We're born to do that, but the idea of this presentation is to show you that when we work on our spirit, whether we're talking about dreams, the shaman, or from the lamas in Tibet, we're looking at the interpretation of the character, whatever it is. No matter whether we're looking, it's just this acceptation of who we are, which is very different from how we think in the West. As we say here, we are fed emotions, our culture, our traditions, everything is linked to emotions. So it's a very delicate subject to take the Eastern Asian side, because it wouldn't necessarily work if you think about it. But if we look at the relationship with Chinese medicine and our ancestors, there are 7 emotions. And there are 7 notions. There's this just or right, true emotion in the Taoist voice. And it's equally positive as negative, without eliminating one another, and always coming back to ourselves at the center. And that is the Tao voice, how they manage the system of emotions.
Does it mean that we do not categorize an emotion?
Yes, they are in categories. In Tibetan medicine, we talk about egregores, and in the Chinese medicine, it's the elements.
The elements, indeed.
So, how does Chinese medicine manage the emotions? So technically everybody knows more or less about the famous 12 meridians. There can be a yearly cycle or a 24-hour cycle. But above all of this, there's a type of control tower that allows us to control these 8 extraordinary vessels. And there we live our emotions. They're shared in the present, and they're all linked with the transgenerational part. And in this, and we can't really change it, but the control tower allows us to have an action on these systems. So this control tower, the system of the extraordinary vessels, the kimai, for those who call it like that. So in these vessels, we have the endocrine system. So these 8 extraordinary vessels, these 8 meridians are in relation or have a relationship with the hormonal secretions. And these hormonal secretions are in fact the fruit of our emotion, and they trigger emotion. So it's the control tower that allows us to control these various reactions.
Does it the sense that will give birth to the emotion?
Yes, it can be what we feel, perhaps in introspection, but it's a feeling, definitely, yes.
Thank you.
So if we come back to the hormonal system, we have all of this negative baggage that are associated to...
What? In the negative patterns, you mean? What do you mean?
Yes, with this negative baggage, I don't have a special name for it, but we talk about the 5 things that can harm us most. We can come back to these 5 harms, but just as an example, there can be hereditary injuries, harms. It can come through our family, perhaps these are more serious injuries, or they can be triggered by other things, for example, by a relationship, an accident. And these injuries or harms are transcendental, and they can allow the individual to become an adult.
Do you want me to name the pains that it's kind of acronym in French? We can say TRAI, and I can name them. So there are 5 main categories, like betrayal, rejection, humiliation, abandonment, and rejection.
Alors ça, ce sont les 5 principales. On dit qu'il y en a plus.
So yes, those are the main things that harm us: betrayal, rejection, abandonment, and injustice. But there is the possibility also to talk about this negative baggage. It can be hereditary, but it can also be the fruit what we gather in our lifetime. For example, if we talk about during the war, we can think of a woman who becomes a mother. But let's look at a rather catastrophic situation. She lost her husband at the war, so she has to play the role of the mother and the father.
And that does happen quite a while, even nowadays.
Yes, so not easy for this woman. She has to be strong as a mother and strong as a father. So her children, in mimicry, will be within this relationship because that's what they've lived throughout their upbringing. So if we see 2 or 3 generations further down, in order for everyone to feel good, then sometimes this double role comes back. And this is just a classic transgenerational example. Things that what made sense in the past but are no longer necessary. So from there, Chinese medicine, Tibetan medicine maybe less, but Chinese medicine has what we call yuan qi. It's an energy, an original energy. So it's still going back to the command being controlled by the control tower, and it allows us, we're going throughout Asia, if we go through the central canal,
in the vertebral column,
yes, in our spine, in our backbone, we have this central column. So this central canal allows us to bring the information back, and then it transcends. So the Chinese Meridian, the idea here is to trigger the yuan qi. It's this original energy. We can talk about the expression of a gene. A gene can be loaded with this negative baggage, but we can come back to where we are without the negative baggage that had been accumulated.
Interesting.
Yes, very interesting. And in this type of work, obviously we can't use a magic wand. What we have to have is a global vision. So we have to, in one sense, understand that what harms us, we don't have to take it personally. We don't have to carry it with us. What triggered it? We just have to understand that it's an inheritance. We inherit this harm. So if we look at the family tree, from the family tree we can understand what triggered this negative baggage. And obviously we won't take that person and move them out of our body. It's just a person who had no choice, who had to react like that at that time. And we have to accept. And this will not affect the transgenerational. We just need to know why the person had this vision and why they had to organize themselves like that. Sometimes we can understand their lives, and we understand that through their lives, our lives, with the same harm, the same injury, through mimicry, even if we even didn't know this ancestor, it's maybe in our subconscious it comes out. And sometimes we can see the distinction between these two lives, and we've really understood that this ancestor who lived this harmful, it's there. We call it, comes through intellect, through intelligence, to say, okay, I've understood, I'm going to continue to do this, or I'm going to stop doing this.
And how can we put it into light? What is the goal to reproduce this behavior, this state of being? What is the unconscious goal to do so?
Yes, I think it comes from our subconscious, and the mimicry. It's what mammals do. Even if we have our individual consciousness, we are still mammals. And as mammals, we learn by mimicry.
Indeed.
That's how we learn. So we need to understand our reactions during our education, before at adolescence, the change in our hormones, we understand who we are in respect to the emotions and how we feel with regards to our parents. So it's quite logical that we are forced to really mimic our parents, whether they do it well, whether they do things well or not well. They're there to reveal and to express their genes. We have 50% of our mother and 50% of the genes come from our father, so we need to understand how it all works. If we're thrown into the world without our parents, without anybody to explain things to us, then obviously perhaps we'd be freer people, but we would still be looking and trying to understand why we react in different ways to things. So those who are lucky enough to be with their parents, perhaps we sometimes see some quarrels, because sometimes people think of it as being quite a weight, but the weight allows us to understand the expressions that come through our genes. And those teenage years, we understand, we learn how to see perhaps the duel that happens at some point, and we see from the other sense, the other side, to be maybe further away from our parents and the conception, to then create a new character. So when we are in a situation of a duel, we can't go forwards. So very often we have to try and understand from within, and within the family circle, we have to mix it all together inside.
Yes, there is this quote from an unknown person that had impressed me. I became myself the day where I stopped to try to become someone. And it makes me think about that when I hear you, when I listen to you. And it's very interesting, because you said that we need to cut the umbilical cord with our parents, and to go where? So, between before and after cut the cordon, what is the goal for that?
Well, let's go back to this negative baggage I was talking about. When we can get over this negative baggage, sometimes we say it's becoming an adult. That's what they say in India, in Chinese medicine. So sometimes within the family tree, there's lots of generations, maybe 10 generations, but no one has become an adult. We have to look for the genetic balance. There's maybe one that will balance out the becoming adult, and who can get over this negative baggage. So how does it all work? Let's try and understand. So this family circumstance, it's a bit like an electric shock. Once we've understood, and then within us, in our heart, and we can listen to what's in our heart, we can imagine perhaps the mother and the father, it's not their fault. They are just there, chosen at birth, and we're perhaps reincarnated in them. It's like if we look at the alchemy, it's like it's our wish to create something that we can then overcome. We want to be able to accept that anything that's gone wrong, anything that's harmed us in the past, all of those things are what have allowed us, in fact, to reach where we are and to overcome and to go forward and to become an adult, as they say.
Yes, thanks, Stephen.
It's true, this information comes also from the extraordinary vessels. They're all associated to the various agara of the family tree.
Can you tell me about the hexagram, what it means?
So this is a symbolic birthmark, and within the tree we can see waves, what was I saying? There are people who are there for varied things, to do various things, whether it's building back the heritage that has been lost, having children, being more free. And then there's all sorts of other things. For example, finding the secrets of the family, leaving the clan to set themselves up elsewhere.
So these are like tasks that are given to us, or that do we choose ourselves?
They are tasks that we've chosen. They're linked to our emotions.
Indeed, okay.
There are moments where the tree needs something, and there will be someone who will incarnate what is needed, and it'll imitate what happened before. So maybe if there's been 3 attempts in the past to transcend the negative baggage, and they haven't necessarily totally succeeded, perhaps there's a handicap. Some people talk about this as a karma, but there is a handicap. So if we look carefully, because nature is beautiful, it's
indeed
the energy that we have inside us. And if we can overcome these handicaps, we can. The negative baggage is a little bit like a wall. We can always climb over a wall, but once we've climbed over, we say, oh, is that it?
Yes, this is very interesting that you just named it. This is thanks to the energy we can feel inside of us that we can transform and overcome obstacles. And this internal alchemy, energy. So this is something I wish to light with you, because I do also come to you as acupuncturist, and we will work on my energy. And this is what we do have at our disposal, the energy to be able to transform these situations. Is it what I do understand?
Yes, we could transform all these situations in a block. Yes, there is. There's so much air going into my lungs, and I feel great. But this is rare. I think we need to look little by little at the tree and the energy that we take within this Chinese system. We can see everything that's available. I'm looking at the vital energy and the basic energies. We can see this vital energy, we can see the parts that are perhaps sabotaged, or the parts that are perhaps from our past, so it's difficult to maneuver. And then there's other parts which are hyper emotions, and that's complicated. And then there's other parts, perhaps from an illness or a disease, and then there's still a little bit left, quite a lot left, available energy. And this energy, if we can maneuver it, we can manage little by little to find a gain of energy. And this gain of energy will allow us to move up to our psychic energy and to conceive and not to take things personally, but to move forward and to get rid of this negative baggage.
Understood. This is really interesting.
So there's another element which is within Chinese medicine, which is linked and comes from Greek, from a Greek name. We call it the hits.
So the hits. Okay, so I spell it. In French we say frappe. In French, and this is like hits.
So what are hits? It's a system that's triggered by our first breath when we're born. And according to the Greeks, these are hits. So there'll be various interests, and the interests are lights. And with us, with all our emotions, we will create interests also linked to images, to things that we see. And you'll understand better why I'm talking about these hits. The hits will give us these interests, will feed us. We can't go into trying to understanding the hits. It's our destiny. If we try to understand, that's going to lead us to the day we die. So there's this conscious or subconscious attraction to things throughout our lives. When two people meet, it's always interesting that they'll find a maximum number of common hits, so that perhaps in the same day they'll go to different places, and according to their way of seeing life, they will turn around at the same time and look at the same thing and look at it, because it's the same hit. So how do we interpret these hits? If it's common, then it will enrich in our lives. It's another person who can be completely different but will be attracted by the same thing. And they can find themselves around these hits.
So this common hit is like a common motivation, common appreciation.
Yes, it's really like lights. Things that appear in time. When we're talking about hits and two people, perhaps two people who were completely within the same hit, they would be soulmates. So soulmates, before they meet each other, have probably lived in the past exactly the same things, which means that they had common hits ever since birth. So what's interesting is that they meet a person with the maximum number of common hits in order to be happy and in order to be able to manage the family tree. But the family tree will create an obstacle to these hits. It's obvious that if we had a radar that allowed us immediately to meet the people who had the same hits, then it would be much more simple. Everybody would find happiness, and this would be utopic. Why utopic? Because in that system there's also what is inherited. What we inherit is much more present in our unconscious and in our conscious, in our choice of partner, in comparison to the actual hits themselves. So normally we mix the two together. We don't need to be struck by lightning to fall in love, but this is a transgenerational pattern that exists, and we can imagine that non-common hits may become common hits in the future. So this is a shame in a way, because it gives us hope this hope doesn't come from nowhere. It is linked to the transgenerational patterns. And this is Taoism. We want to always find who had lived this or that, and within the context of life and love, And from there, it's simpler, it's easier to work things out. And perhaps to bring us to say, I'm not going to be determined to find the negative baggage in my partner so that I can then have a daily life that's more pleasant by meeting someone with the same hits.
Yeah, understand. It makes me think to an Indian family that I met during the training. They explained to me during this training that was talking about past life regressions with the Dr. Brian Weiss. They explained that for them, there are several times that they met through lives, and probably more or less as parent-child. Is it possible that we can have this intention to meet again people with whom we had already experiences, to be able to improve our relationships?
Yes, the Indian have a caste system which was perhaps corrupted by the British, but at the basis of this caste system, the idea of Veda is to define. So at adolescence, or at the beginning of adolescence, it's very difficult with this explosion of hormones to decide who is the right person. But the people who are organizing they have the wise calculations with the stars to decide who will marry who, and they have to research to find a maximum of common hits. And they have to discover these people throughout their lives. Hopefully, if the person was good at working out the stars. So this is the idea. But there's something else that comes more from Tibet, from the Tibetan culture. So there's this idea of reincarnation. In the idea of reincarnation, we understand immediately that we can be the father or the mother of all beings. So this explains also that the Tibetans, in their Buddhism, have dissociated themselves from the parents. In other words, everything that's here is normal, and it doesn't pose any problems. The only thing I have to do is to work on my spirit and not the emotions linked to parents. So this is a different point of view. Having met so many great lamas, and very often they have pathologies that would be quite simple to work on in psychoanalysis, but it's quite complicated also to deal with. But for them, they have less interest in that. It's two different worlds.
Yes, thanks. And Stefan, I'd like to ask you this question. When someone comes to see you and they want to have a session of acupuncture, acupressure, or other modalities that you do have in your art of healing, in the beginning of the session, when they come, do you name to them possibly the links that you can make in the family trees, in the genealogy of the person? Is it really important to understand consciously what happens, or is it different in your work?
Yes, it's really led by... It's rare for an acupuncture, for me to actually talk a lot. When we talk about Taoist medicine, we see less of that at the moment with the situation in China, but with them we do talk a lot, and we try and understand what's happening. The patients are not always
lien avec une hérédité.
linked to
Des fois, ils sont juste en lien avec une
a
pathologie, un
heritage,
symptôme.
but linked to a symptom or a pathology.
Si on fait une
But
boucle
if we
autour de
take
la
a loop
personne,
around the
on prend
person
tous
and
les
take into
aspects,
consideration all the aspects, there's the physical, emotional, transgenerational, and also the work on the spirits for spirit for certain people. If we take a loop, we will obviously have to talk about the family. So the principle with which I work is to have a starting point. A starting point, a common starting point with the person, like a hit. To find a starting point, and from this common starting point with which we're in total agreement, orally, we'll start. And we will do this loop, and we'll bring the loop. We're going to go through the explanation of the family, even if the person wasn't necessarily led to talk about that. Maybe I hear that they've already been working for 15 years on that, and it's okay now. It's been done, but we obviously have to go back through it because it's part of this loop. And it's always well understood if we follow this guideline. And that's my method to create a starting point together.
Thanks, Stefan. And it does also allow me to speak about the fact that you do practice your art. You have your patients, you work from Switzerland, but you do also teach Chinese medicine, so acupuncture, acupressure. Is it something that people can contact you to see on your website? Do they come face to face to learn with you?
I think at the moment the boundaries are going to close between France and Switzerland, so coming to see me might be complicated, but here in Switzerland we can. Our training courses give you a diploma for Switzerland, which can also be recognized in France, but there's not an enormous amount of legislation in France for this. And also training courses, further training courses within the curriculum that allows you to go further in, for example, Chinese and Tibetan medicine.
Yes, thanks, Stefan. I know that some of the people who watch us are also practitioners in different alternative therapies, and that's why I mention it, because some people may be interested in learning from and with you. So they can meet you on your website, and they can also send you a message or contact you. Stefan, I really thank you for this interview, because there are very important things that you do mention. And we know that we can have action, that we can work to add more light. And there are so much things to say, and because you have so much knowledge, you had the occasion, the privilege, you named it, to meet very important people in your art, in your practice of healing. So, Stefan, would you like to say a last word to the people who are watching us related to our family tree and our life to create?
Well, I would like to say thank you, Sophie. You're doing a very beautiful thing, and you're giving so much to all of us, those listening to us, and it's thanks to you that we're doing that today. Thank you, Sophie.
Thanks, Stefan.